Good afternoon. My name is Carson Hetty. I am a cloud transformation specialist for Missouri with Microsoft, and we are hosting a webinar today with Covenant Technology Partners, one of our esteemed partners that's located here in St. Louis, works all over the country, very strong in many practices, and the one specifically that we'll be touching on today is Power BI. They have some special programs that and planning practices that are very well esteemed in the Power BI space. Fantastic programs like their dashboard and today we'll be touching on their data visualization Jumpstart. We're joined today by Gary Bell, who will be giving the presentation, and I'm going to, without further ado, turn it over to him. So Gary, thanks for joining us, and take it away.
Great, thanks Carson, and good afternoon everyone. Again, I'm Gary Bell. I'm a data analytics architect with Covenant Technology Partners. I've been with Covenant now for almost 5 years and been doing data analytics on the Microsoft platform for many years before that. So this is absolutely my specialty, and Power BI specifically has become one of our key focuses over the past couple of years. So today the session intends to kind of cover our Jumpstart, but I'm going to take a bit of a broader approach. We're going to talk Power BI just in general at a high level here initially. Then we'll potentially go into some. I think we're going to jump into a really quick demo. And my assumption at this point is that most or all on the call have at least some familiarity with Power BI. So we'll keep that part real quick. Jump into some key usage scenarios in terms of how people are using Power BI. What kind of workloads is really being used to take advantage of, and then a lot of a review of what is new, and I'm going to say newish because I'm going to cover things that have really been added to the platform probably over the past year or so, and just kind of run through that list quickly and talk about some exciting things that are coming here this fall. There's a big release due in October, and then go through not only our Jumpstart, but a couple other ways, and this is meant to be less of a sales pitch and more of just we're talking to a number of clients throughout the area about Power BI. The interest has shifted from what is Power BI and what the heck do I do with it to how can I get this up and going in my organization? How do I help transform my organization with the self-service capabilities of a Power BI, and what does that look like from an architectural standpoint, from a governance standpoint, and then how does a offering like a Jumpstart potentially fit there as well. So again, if you could bear with me, those of you that may have some background already with Power BI, I'm just going to go through some real basics here up front, and we'll fly through some of those. So, the Power BI, as I said, going back a couple of years, a lot of people were more interested in kind of what it is. But I think it's fair to say at this point that the hype train, as I'm saying here, is definitely left the station. Everyone, I think, understands what it is. They've seen a lot of the dashboards and the visuals that Power BI can produce. But one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about here is the data visualization piece, and I think this may be a bit of a common misconception as it relates to Power BI. It's really only one component of the Power BI platform, and that platform is evolving rapidly as well. So we'll get into some architectural diagrams as we move ahead as well. But just from a Power BI perspective, I mentioned kind of the hype, and this is the most recent Gartner Magic Quadrant, and Power BI and Microsoft here have really rocketed up this thing over the last 3 or 4 years. You see them well out in front on the completeness of their vision, and they're really moving up quickly on the ability to execute as well. And some of the things we'll touch on here in terms of what's coming, I think, are going to affect that moving forward as well. So Microsoft has gone from, and they entered the space with the Power BI tool 3 or 4 years ago, really trying to play catch up with Tableau and even a Click who'd kind of pioneer this newer data visualization, modern analytics kind of space, and they've quickly not only caught up but passed those key players there. So I talked about kind of the overall the tool Power BI and how the visual is really only one part. And so if you think back to the way people have done data, let's say data warehousing, data marts, reporting just in general for the past 10, 15 years, it's typically involved these three kind of key steps, and maybe not in every case a cube in the middle there, but I'm highlighting here it just to kind of demonstrate where I think Power BI fits. So in the past we've had the SQL Server platform, and SQL's kind of shipped with these three core services that have kind of filled these gaps. You've had integration services to take care of the ETL. You had the analysis services to take care of the semantic layer of the cubes, and then reporting services has been there for 10 plus years now, in more or less its current iteration, to do a lot of what we call kind of the fixed format reporting. And there have been other tools that Microsoft had along the way. There was a performance point that did some dashboarding kind of stuff that's kind of shipped as part of SharePoint and other things there. But these have been the three key components, and so they've been kind of delivered from Microsoft via these three separate tools. Power BI, in a way, incorporates all three of those things into one kind of easier to use, in some cases, self-service tool. So there's a Power Query functionality in Power BI that really lets you get in and massage the data, bring it in, and take care of the various transformations you need to get it ready for reporting. What I'll just call the Power BI data sets allows you to do the modeling of the data, figuring out how the various data sets you're pulling in are going to relate to one another, and creating some of the various semantic layer kind of definitions that are needed there, including calculated measures and metrics and things like that. And then, of course, the piece that I think most people are familiar with from a Power BI perspective are the end reporting visualization piece, the reports and dashboards, and certainly that's kind of the sexy piece that is easy to demo, and we'll take a look at a few things there real quickly here in a moment. That's the piece that the end users typically touch and interact with and navigate those reports and dashboards. But I just wanted to take a second to kind of underline the fact that Power BI is kind of an integrated platform, and a lot of the work that you do in these first two steps, the ETL and the semantic layer, the cube layer, are going to go a long way to being able to deliver not only good reports, but reports that people are going to be able to easily navigate and really start to unleash that self-service model that, frankly, in business intelligence and data analytics space, we've been talking about self-service analytics for many years, and with modern tools like Power BI, we're getting closer than ever to being able to really deliver on that kind of the promise of the industry, going back quite a ways. So real quickly, key scenarios for Power BI, and because there are a lot of organizations that use it differently. Some organizations are going to check 2, 3, maybe even all 4 of these boxes. Others will maybe focus on a couple types here, but Power BI is really flexible enough to allow people to use it in a variety of different ways. So, as I mentioned there a moment ago, the self-service, more the ad hoc analysis, is maybe the most prevalent use case. And that, and whether you even know it or not at this point, you may have people within your organization that have gotten a hold of Power BI Desktop, for example, which is a free tool that we'll touch on maybe here in a moment. And maybe doing some of this stuff even unbeknownst to IT and IT leadership kind of within various departments. And it certainly enables and empowers people to do that kind of work that maybe traditionally has always occurred in Excel, where users would maybe work with IT or maybe not to extract data from various systems within an organization, typically dump it down to a spreadsheet kind of format, and then kind of go to town on it from an Excel standpoint, kind of do some Excel kung fu kind of moves, and whether it's macros or you name it, get the data prepared in Excel and presented it that way. And so a Power BI desktop tool can certainly go a long way to making that kind of work much easier for your business analyst crowd. And then the way that most organizations have traditionally delivered, at least kind of certified, if you want to call it that, data, is organizational reporting. And that's maybe where like reporting services or other we call kind of fixed format reporting tools have come in. And that cycle has traditionally involved business users coming to like a report development team or an IT team and defining the requirements. Here's what I want my report to look like. The report development team taking some amount of time to turn that back around, and then kind of push it out to the users. And traditionally in kind of these fixed format reportings, where you may have some parameters and some filters that users can control, but for the most part, once the report has been rendered, it's not very interactive. And a couple others, we'll talk about some of the embedding capabilities of Power BI, which is just taking Power BI content and putting it in other applications, making it look real native to either a website or we talked to a lot of clients about embedding content in SharePoint, for example, or other third-party applications. And then and Power BI has a very powerful capabilities around streaming or what we call near real-time analytics or monitoring, and ability to pump in data directly to a Power BI dashboard and watch it. Can pull up a Power BI dashboard and watch it change in real time without having to refresh the page, and that can enable key scenarios around IoT kind of workloads, et cetera. So those are the four biggest ones. I'm sure there are probably a few other ways that various organizations are using Power BI, but those are the kind of the high points. So at this point, I think I'm just going to jump on out to Power BI and just run through a couple of real quick things. Because I think it will better inform a couple other decisions, or I'm sorry, a couple other discussions that I want to have here in a moment. So Power BI is and we're on PowerBI.com now. So I mentioned the desktop tool a moment ago. That's certainly a separate piece where you do more of your back-end development. So the ETL and the cube or data set piece typically takes place at that level. We're here at the visual end, where we're more or less just interacting with the content that is produced. And again, you can produce the dashboards and the reports that we're looking at now can be produced even either here directly on the web or in the tool as well. So we've got the dashboard up, and the dashboard level users can kind of pin content from various reports and even various data sets. And then if we get back to the report level, which you can usually access by clicking on one of the pinned content areas, I'm just going to jump back to a scorecard. We're looking at a customer profitability sample data set. And, as I'm sure, again, a lot of you have seen, so again, I apologize if this is a review for a number of you. But the key feature here is just how interactive these dashboards are as you click down to just the East region, for example. Up here, I focused down on just the handful of states that are on the East Coast. If you want to focus on an individual period, the month of August, for example, you can kind of filter that here. And so users are really encouraged. It really kind of begs people to interact with this data and click around, apply various filters, drill into data. As you can see, maybe here, if I want to drill into that East region, get down to the next level, I can get down to the state-by-state breakdown here, and then again filter it down. So a lot of capability there. A lot of this is also informed or encouraged by the report designer, and making sure that they've laid out from a visual standpoint a report that's going to be easily understood by your end users as well. So, but those are the kind of things you can do here at the report level. The key thing to keep in mind here at the report level is these reports, and to enable this kind of interaction, they're all sourced from a single data set. So that doesn't mean a single data table. Again, you could pull in, let's say, a list of products from a CRM or a database that master data database that maintains your product list, and sales may come from an ERP platform, and so you could pull that in as you're building the data model, relate that data within the model, and it'll all be exposed here. But the data does have to belong to that same model. So again, if you've got other data, and the example that I was going to use here in a moment is I've got another set of data that pulls data from Google Analytics to track performance of a website. It probably wouldn't make sense to integrate that data directly into a scorecard or a report rather that's more focused on revenue. But it might be interesting to see them side by side at a dashboard level, just to get a better overall picture of the health of the organization. And so you can absolutely do that at the dashboard level by pinning content from various reports to a dashboard, but not down here at the report level. That all this content, again, has to come from a single data source. If we go back to the dashboard level, one of the other things that's really compelling here for, again, enabling more of a self-service model is the ability to ask questions directly about your data. And so this is really just to start typing questions, and results will kind of magically appear. So if we want to see a revenue, let's say by state, this is one of the visuals we looked at there a moment ago. So it's gonna pick a visual for you out of the box. We might want to see it as a filled map, like we were looking at there a moment ago, and it can create that. So not only is the kind of the core interface here to create visualizations very easy to use by enabling or by presenting users with kind of a pivot table kind of a view of your data when they expose that data set. But here, you could expose this kind of functionality to your business users with basically no technical expertise at all, and certainly no need to understand how to write a query or even build a simple report. They really just kind of type in and ask what they want to see, and the report is created. And then if they like something like this, they can always take it and pin it back to the dashboard, and then it's there for them the next time they want to see it. So just a real quick, again, 5-10 minute kind of run through of some of the core Power BI functionality. I guess the other thing that's worth mentioning here, and we'll get into some discussion about the collaboration kind of functionality here within Power BI. But while I'm here, I just wanted to pop over. So what we're looking at now is what we call the My Workspace, and every Power BI user is going to get a My Workspace area, which is a place for users to deploy kind of their own view of various data sets and reports. Now you can share from your My Workspace to other users with just simple sharing functionality here that's built in, and basically copy in some email addresses, and they'll get an invitation to come view your dashboard. But more from a more enterprise standpoint, the typical sharing and deployment occurs through what we call an app workspace. They used to be called content organization or organization content packs in Power BI. They've kind of shifted away from those, and we've got app workspaces now. And an app workspace is, you can think of it like, in fact, currently they're directly integrated with a team in Office 365, and so you create a team, or in Power BI parlance, an app workspace. You can invite people to that workspace that you'd like to share in the development, typically, of that workspace. And you can, the workspace the best analogy there may be some kind of a development environment traditionally. And I say development environment, so you want to keep that the group of people that can access that fairly small, limited primarily just to those that are going to be making changes to either the underlying data set or even the reports that are generated here. And then once you have that content ready to go. And in fact, here's just a laundry list of all the workspaces that I'm currently a part of. And so if I find my little test one down here, once you have that content ready to go, then you create what's called a Power BI app. And so there's kind of an app store concept of Power BI now. You create your app. In this case, I've already created it, so it'll allow me to update it. You can select what content you want to include, and then who you want to share it with, whether it be the entire organization or again a specific set of people, or and what's certainly recommended is to share that out with groups of people. So Active Directory distribution lists or groups are the best way to share these content, and that way you put the onus on managing those lists back on the Active Directory administrator, and don't have to add a new person to this application or set of reports, I guess is a better way to refer to it, every time someone moves in or out of a group or the organization. And so once that's published, again in my case, I hit the update button. You'll see a list of apps that are available in your kind of internal app store, or in some cases you might have to go out and kind of search for it and find others, which you can absolutely do as well. So, and that's an easy way to, that is the preferred way to distribute Power BI content to a large set of users. So you can imagine if you're using this, if we go back to the different potential use cases, if you want to use Power BI from more of an organizational reporting standpoint and want to deploy content maybe widely to the entire organization instead of key KPIs, for example, that dictate a report on the health of the organization, and maybe even embed that in like an intranet portal, SharePoint portal kind of page. This would be a good way to do that. Even if you want to deploy these to, let's say, an entire department. The finance department wants to be able to have a set of reports that they distribute, but keep it locked down to just the finance team. This would be a way to do that as well. And the viewers of these reports, the consumers, if you will, they would have the ability to kind of come in. They could click around and navigate the content, but they at this level don't have the permissions to edit the visuals or certainly edit the underlying data source. So the concept would be that you've got a couple key people, whether it's a key analyst at a department level, or maybe even IT driven in some cases, produce a Power BI data set, data model is what we'll call it, and then they publish it to a wider audience of people that kind of consume it. And again, you have full access to kind of navigate the data, drill down, cross drill, et cetera, filter the data. But they wouldn't have access or wouldn't really even need to understand how that data is put together, the various data sets that it pulls from. A lot of that ETL and data modeling, semantic layer content is taken care of for them. So just want to highlight that because we're going to jump back in here to the slides. I may come back here to the web at some point if we start talking about something else. Let's see. So the what's new and what's coming. So under the new list here, I've got. Again, I think going back, maybe something within the last year. Some of these are not nearly as new, and some of them are quite new. But I just wanted to highlight a few of these because I think a lot of people learned about Power BI sometime probably a year or two ago, and it was still fairly nascent in terms of its development. Power BI is on a rapid development cycle in that they produce new versions of the desktop tool monthly, and they're almost constantly updating the content on the features and functionality on the web. And then I think they've started to try to sync up with some of the larger release cycles for the larger business applications team, and that speaks to kind of some of the stuff that's coming in an October release cycle as well. So, but just to kind of hit on a few of these things, and we'll talk about the first one here, dedicated capacity, when I highlight real quickly some of the licensing options for you here in a moment. But that was announced maybe about a year ago, but that's an important one I wanted to talk about. It just allows you to move away from what we call kind of the shared model, which is kind of the basic version of Power BI that when you deploy to powerbi.com, you're essentially deploying to kind of a shared tenant, shared instance of Power BI that's hosted at one of Microsoft's data centers. And as such, you're somewhat limited by Microsoft in terms of how much data you can push out there, how often you can refresh that data, just to try to limit the effects on other users potentially, and keep you from bogging down that shared service. So a dedicated capacity would be a way to get around that, and essentially it's exactly what it sounds like. It's just essentially a Power BI server in Microsoft's data center that's dedicated just to your organization, and so you can kind of do with it as you will. At that point, the amount of data you can store there is much higher. The number of times you can refresh much greater as well. So those are some things that they've added as they've started to evolve the platform. Theming, they've one of the common things that they've been asked a lot about is just how do I get my color scheme, and so there's ways to with CSS kind of files or ways to apply some theming, some consistent theming to Power BI dashboards and reports. Quick insights is something that maybe we'll jump back over there and look at that here in a moment. But as you publish a data set out to Power BI and tell Power BI how these various tables that you've imported are all related to one another, what the metrics are, what more of the attribute dimensional kind of data is, Microsoft has released something called Quick Insights, which just takes, I guess you could call it kind of a machine learning approach, and Microsoft, you click the Quick Insights button, and Power BI will go off and analyze your data set and look for interesting and notable breakdowns of your data. So again, if we think back to the data set we're looking at a moment ago, customer profitability, it may take a look at the customer profitability metric and notice that customer profitability really spiked in the third quarter, for example, and it will present back to you just kind of a series of these what it considers kind of interesting breakdowns. Now your mileage is going to vary greatly with some of those, and so you'll quickly take a look at some, and it'll either be something that's really obvious to you, which there's limited value to, or something that where it tried to assume or make the leap for some kind of correlation in data, which probably doesn't make any sense. But it certainly occasionally can come across some very interesting stuff, and it can be a very useful tool for data profiling, for example, if for analysts that are trying to take a look at a maybe new and somewhat unfamiliar data set. You can find out a lot of interesting stuff there. There's a Visio custom visual that's recently been added, and I kind of highlighted that one because that's something actually that even reporting services had a version of going back, but this really unleashes quite a bit of possibilities, and that you can create your own Visio diagram, upload it into Power BI, and kind of custom code it or custom color it. So you can imagine like a shop floor diagram, and you could maybe highlight areas where efficiency is higher or lower. Along the visualization end, they within the past, I think this just came out of public preview within the past 6 or 8 months, is the addition of ArcGIS maps from Esri, and this just takes some of the kind of core Power BI visualization, the mapping visualizations, and just kind of on steroids. And there's a lot you can do if you're already an Esri shop and do some stuff with these maps. You can integrate some of your subscription capabilities here at the Power BI level. You can do some things around heat maps is one of the things we've done with these maps as well. So much more capability here from a mapping perspective through this partnership here. You also now have the ability in Power BI to add things like bookmarks, which essentially, if you want to bookmark maybe a set of filters or selections that you've made on a report, so you can easily get back to it, you can do that as well. Buttons allow you to do some navigation, maybe between pages, more from a developer standpoint, or even a button that will reset all the filters on a page is another common use case for something like that. But it gives you some more capabilities there. Composite models is actually brand new. This is this month, and it may still even be in public preview. And by the way, you see that a lot in terms of the development cycle in Power BI. They'll start more in public preview, and you'll see features released that way on a regular basis. And then usually after 3 or 4 months, they will move forward into the full release. But the composite model allows you to really removes a restriction that used to be there as it relates to what we call direct query models in Power BI, and allows you to integrate other data into those kind of models. Now, that's something that you can easily do with what we call more the cached model in Power BI, where you could pull data from a variety of sources and then have that data refreshed and stored locally in Power BI. But these direct query models, that was a bit more problematic. It also allows you some kind of hybrid scenarios here that composite models do to cache maybe a subset of your data in Power BI and then query back so maybe more of your dimensional data, for example, that doesn't change that often, can be cached at the Power BI level, whereas the transactional kind of stuff, your daily sales, for example, would still be pushed back in more of a direct query mode to your source systems. Incremental refresh is another big one, and this is I think in preview as well at this point. But one of the limitations of Power BI right now is that when you do refresh these data sets, it's really an all or nothing kind of a refresh. So if you've got 5 years worth of sales data that you're bringing into Power BI, and you want to refresh that every day, so you grab yesterday's data, there has not been to this point a way to easily do that without some real Power BI gymnastics going on behind the scenes. But traditionally, it's just going to refresh the entire data set now. So you can imagine that it kind of slows down the refresh and can be real problematic as you get into some very large data sets. Power BI, what you're seeing happen is it's incorporating more and more of the analysis services engine into its. It already hosts, as the diagram that I showed earlier demonstrated. It already hosts a lot of the analysis services like Cube technology at the Power BI level, but they're not quite have not quite reached feature parity in terms of some of the more advanced things you can do in analysis services. And I say analysis service, I'm speaking specifically about analysis services tabular models. But more and more of those features are coming to Power BI, and incremental refresh is certainly one of those. It's something we've been able to do with tabular models and analysis services, but have not had a chance to do in Power BI. I will note here that is a premium feature, and we'll talk about what premium means here in a moment as well as we get into the licensing. And then just a laundry list of new custom visuals. If you have ever gone out to the Power BI custom visual, I guess we'll call it marketplace, I think is the way they refer to it. There are more and more of those showing up every day, and there are some really there's some really strange ones. There are some really useful ones, and some pretty advanced things in terms of the way you can use those. And those are I think in most cases, I know in most cases they're free to download. Some of them are on more of a freemium model where you get more advanced features by paying a subscription. But for the most part, you can go out and grab those directly from the marketplace and start using those in your reports. So coming in October, and these are a couple big things, and the first being reporting services. So I imagine a number of you have a legacy reporting services application, or reports rather. And it's not uncommon at all to see organizations with 2, 3, 4, maybe 500 various reporting services reports that have been built up over time. And one of the issues has been, there has not been any solution from Microsoft to host reporting services in Azure, short of spinning up a SQL instance and hosting it out in the cloud. Power BI, and again specifically Power BI Premium, is going to allow, beginning this fall, the ability to upload those reporting services reports directly into Power BI and then host them in the cloud. I have not had a chance to play with this myself yet, but that's going to be a pretty significant change in terms of the way that we've had to look at architecture for putting together Power BI kind of slash reporting services architectures. Power BI, we get this question a lot as well. Power BI is not intended to replace reporting services, and I think in almost every instance you're going to find you still need some reporting services for what we call those fixed format reports. And so you almost inevitably are going to need these two products to live side by side in some manner. And so this, again, it's going to be a big plus in terms of the way that this is can be handled in the future. And then I'm just going to briefly talk about the common data model for analytics. This is the way that Microsoft appears to be pushing a lot of their business application platform, is to center around a common data model that is hosted out in Azure. Essentially sits on top of Azure Data Lake, and kind of as the name implies, it's going to be a predefined set of extensible entities. So think customers and products and sales, those kind of core components to a lot of organizations that you map your data into, or can map your data into, and maybe your CRM, Microsoft CRM platform might be pushing data into some of those entities, and there'll be some pre-built content here in Power BI that can take advantage of that. You can also use Power BI to push data into that model as well. And in fact, this is kind of as part of this, they're going to begin hosting, essentially hosting Power Query, the ETL component of Power BI, in Power BI, the service as well. So you can take that Power BI data set that you've defined, the Power Query steps that you've defined there to transform that data, and essentially schedule it to run and load data into that common data model. There are a lot of exciting things that I think that this could kind of lead to, but I think we're still in the early stages of exactly how that is going to look when it reaches maturity. So, but definitely keep an eye on that. You'll be hearing a lot more about that. So the three ways that, and I say how Covenant can help, but this is not meant to be a sales pitch as much as this is what a lot of our clients have been asking us questions around these kind of three key areas as we talk about Power BI. And again, as the interest shifts from kind of what Power BI is to how do I get this fit this into my organization and do it in a kind of responsible manner that I'm going to be able to administer and maintain and just kind of keep track of. So, the first here is just architecture, and what does it look like when I integrate Power BI, and how can I push that into my environment? So we go through typically a kind of a series of questions, just trying to understand how organizations intend to use the content. Where it's going to be viewed from, where the data is coming from. Security questions. I'm not going to go through these each point by point, but just to establish the intent, or at least the initial intent for content, to understand kind of how an organization currently works with data, maybe the maturity level of an organization as well, and trying to figure out what the best architecture looks like. And there are a couple different ways. I just threw a couple different diagrams on here just to highlight a few of the various ways this can be set up, and really the key here is you see Power BI desktop sitting kind of here in the middle, and it is used to pull in that source data and create the data set with the data modeling activity that happens at that level, kind of create that semantic layer in Power BI, and can even be used to create the reports as well. That content gets published out to the Power BI service. And I'm sure I should circle back here. This is more of a, kind of a departmental kind of approach to Power BI, for example, as opposed to more of an organizational or enterprise kind of approach. It's published at the Power BI service. We've still got the organizational content pack, but that's essentially the Power BI app as well there, or the workspace. And then that content can be consumed by users. Here we've got kind of Power BI mobile applications on one end. I didn't talk about the ability to take a look at these data sets in Excel, but you can, there's an Analyze in Excel button in Power BI that allows you to directly connect to the Power BI data set as well. And then I guess the one that's missing here is just the Power BI.com services itself well, I'm sorry, the Power BI service there, but the viewing of the reports and dashboards there at that level as well. The other thing to note here is the gateway. So in order for Power BI to refresh its content at the cloud level, it needs to be able to come back and periodically gather information from your source data. That source data, if it exists behind a firewall inside of an on-prem system in your organization, you need to set up one of these on-premise data gateways so that you can create a secure tunnel for Power BI to come back and refresh that data. If all your data is cloud-borne, maybe it's coming from Microsoft CRM or, excuse me, I mentioned Google Analytics, and those kind of services, they're already in the cloud. There's no need for that gateway at that point. In terms of more of an organizational or an enterprise kind of approach, I mean, the key difference here is that we pulled some of the data modeling components out of Power BI, and so as I mentioned, it can handle all those tools, those steps, the ETL and the analytics. I'm sorry, the semantic layer and analysis services, cubes, etc. We pulled that out here and perform that work directly in analysis services. Again, as analysis services and the Power BI. The kind of the technology underpinning Power BI become closer and closer. This may not be as this kind of an architecture may not be as important or as necessary. One of the reasons you would pull analysis services out today would be that so you could, for example, build reporting services reports against that analysis services cube. Now, again, as they start to push reporting services into Power BI, that's probably not going to be an issue moving forward. And there are also some of the incremental refresh that we talked about that now Power BI is starting to get as well. But there are other reasons that analysis services you may require kind of analysis services to be pulled out. And one of those may just be that you want to keep that data on premises, and you could keep this analysis services, for example, behind your firewall and interact with it that way. The other thing notable here is the Power BI premium capacity. That's a different licensing model. It's for the dedicated capacity for Power BI, and that starts to make a lot more sense at an enterprise level as opposed to they call the pro license, which is a per user model. So speaking of licensing, I know everybody loves to talk licensing. I'm just doing a time check here. I've got a few more minutes. Three key options here for Power BI. You've got your kind of your standard pro license. This is a per user license, so everyone that needs a pro license pays essentially the retail price is $10 a user a month. A lot of organizations layer these in with their Office 365 subscription, and if you get like the full E5 from Microsoft, Power BI Pro is included, in which case your costs usually come down substantially as well. But just quickly in terms of who needs a pro license, with the current licensing model, anyone that is creating content, publishing content, and now even consuming shared content needs a Power BI Pro license. So again, to reiterate that, because it's an important distinction here, so it's not only the people that are maybe your power users, your analysts, maybe your IT team that is creating the Power BI reports, data sets, etc. But if they want to share that content, and that's share it, whether it's share it via the My Workspace share button that I showed you when we were online there a moment ago, or publish that app, and so they want to users that consume that app, they all need pro licenses as well. Unless you go with one of these other models we'll talk about here in a moment, but that's kind of the basic. And so that makes sense for a lot of small organizations. The premium capacity that we'll talk about here in a moment, from a cost standpoint, probably only really makes sense when you get into the 200, 300, 400 user range before it's even really worth considering. There are a few other features that could impact that as well, but but that's kind of the basic option there, the Pro license. The two others are the dedicated capacity. So you've got, I'm going to skip down to the Power BI Premium and talk about it first. So it's the Premium. Again, you've got kind of essentially your own dedicated server, if you want to think of it that way, just for your organization. So at that point, there's no need to do the per user licenses. You can share with anybody via these premium workspaces is essentially how you assign that capacity. Those workspaces we talked about earlier get assigned to this dedicated capacity, and then anyone in the organization can view that content. You still do need a handful of Power BI Pro licenses, because the content creators are still going to need that Pro license to be able to create, publish content that way. But if you've got hundreds of users that you want to push content, Power BI content to within your organization, then this becomes much more manageable and appealing from a price perspective at some point as well. And then I just kind of generically put extra features. So we already talked about a couple of the key ones, right? So when reporting services makes its debut in Power BI later this fall, that's going to be a Power BI Premium capacity. The incremental refresh is going to be a Power BI Pro Pro feature, Power BI Premium feature as well. So those could be reasons as well, especially that I can imagine the reporting services being a big deal for some organizations, and even if they're not, in the many hundreds of users, they may decide that the price tag for premium still may make sense, because they can get rid of maybe another machine that they were going to have to use to host reporting services content. And then sitting kind of somewhere in between is this Power BI embedded licensing option, and it like Premium gives you dedicated capacity, but it's intended solely for embedding Power BI content in other applications. So if you're an ISV and have your own website or application, you want to be able to do analytics in Power BI and embed those into your application, this may be a way to go. Again, this is not a per user licensing model. This is a per capacity basis, so you can funnel as many people into that capacity as you think that capacity can handle, and then of course you can always scale up that capacity as necessary as well if your usage exceeds initial expectations. So there's probably a lot more to discuss around licensing, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of big ticket items there real quickly. Finally, kind of the last two, again, things that we're being asked a lot about as it relates to Power BI and the first of those is governance, and a lot of questions about governance. And so I've been drawing the parallel back to kind of the early stages of SharePoint, for example, or even now, Microsoft has released Teams, which I think is creating some of the same kind of questions from an IT standpoint, which is just, we've got these great collaboration tools. They're meant to be kind of self-service in a lot of ways and empower users to more easily collaborate and share information. But if we don't put some controls around this, it's going to get out of hand quickly. And so how do we manage app workspaces in Power BI, and how should those be used, and who should have access to them, and who can publish, and who should publish, and when they publish that content, who should have access to it? So a lot of questions about just how we can, put, again, I want to be clear. You want to put some restrictions around Power BI, but if you go too far, then people are just going to find ways around it. So how do we find that happy medium for our organization that's going to allow kind of the right balance of control and really monitoring is the other half of that. Piece of that. So I've listed that here as well. But so what you can't control or restrict, then you typically want to monitor. And there are a number of monitoring tools and more coming on the Power BI side that allow Power BI administrators to kind of keep track of what data is being used and where it's going. And maybe you've got a new data set that's been published and it's become real popular, and there are decisions about capacity, maybe from a premium capacity standpoint to make there as well. So those are the questions that we're getting a lot around governance, and I would certainly encourage you to think about those before this gets out of hand. And I say that because we've already seen this happen in a number of organizations where, again, people have gotten a hold of Power BI desktop maybe on a departmental basis, and maybe they've even purchased a few of their own Power BI Pro licenses, and it's kind of off and running. And before you know it, you're going to be chasing people and trying to change behavior rather than trying to set it up ahead of time and encourage people to manage it correctly. And then the last beat is just the is kind of the Jumpstart, which we talked about up front, and that's our kind of our core offering around just really helping organizations get started with Power BI. So it involves really a data modeling is kind of the key deliverable here, and taking an initial use case that's usually fairly targeted, pulling in data from whatever systems are needed to supply data to deliver the use case, modeling it correctly in Power BI. And again, this is where this process and kind of again, this is something that we typically work with organizations on, so they kind of see how this process works. They get an idea of what best practices look like here, and we can start with a good, solid initial model to kind of grow from within Power BI. And we can typically turn these around in 2 to 4 weeks and leave you with, again, a great example of how this Power BI data set, data model development should work, as well as talk to you about some of the other key decisions that I just kind of ran through a moment ago from an architectural standpoint, some guidance on what that looks like, and some of the governance questions as well. And again, the final deliverable is just the end reports and dashboards, which can also be a great kind of internal selling tool as you try to push Power BI within the organization. And frankly, I think Power BI in a lot of ways kind of does that job for itself. So I think certainly within the last 6 to 12 months, we have not been making the case for Power BI in that we're trying to push it into organizations. It's typically been the other way around. It's typically organizations coming to us saying that people really want to use this. They've already started using it, but we need to do it right. So this certainly helps kind of get off to a good first start there. That's all I had for today. We've got 5 minutes or so left here before the end of the hour. I don't know if there are any questions. I think, Olia, were you monitoring any questions that may have come in? I don't know if there's anything that I didn't hit on, or questions specifically. But if not, again, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me directly if you've started to look at Power BI and have questions specifically about kind of how to get started, from an architectural standpoint, or maybe even some of those governance topics. Those are all things that again we've been helping a number of clients out with. So. Well, if there's not,
I think you're good. Thank you so much, Gary. We really appreciate you presenting today.
Okay. Well, again, thanks everyone for hanging in, and hopefully you got at least a little bit of good information here this afternoon. So I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.